DND number 4, Weeds Grow in Jesus' Name. Chapter 10. Ricky and Steve walked slowly down the strip after having dropped actor boy Clay off at one of Steve's buddies, who'd been willing to put Clay up for a few weeks. Jason headed back to his family, and Ricky gave Justin a call to let him know that they were alive and well. Justin had heaved a huge sigh of relief. Justin was the worrier. He was a very good worrier. Ricky smiled. Justin was also a darn good martial artist, especially for a corporate suit. He and brother Jason had been his father's first students, and more importantly, they'd been loyal friends. It was Justin who devised the last known communication plan in an effort to keep him from worrying when he couldn't reach someone. As it turned out, the plan had become a major source of nail biting for him. "So, what do you think Tommy's up to?" Steve asked. "Nothing good. He's been moving around without anyone knowing what he's doing. He obviously has plans. After Beth and now this imposter, I'm going to have to say that his plans are big ones." He blew out a breath and shook his head. "I swear, Steve, I am so very sick and tired of this ridiculous game. Do you realize it's been going on since before I was born? I mean, enough is enough. Man, somehow I gotta end it. I just hope some long-lost cousin or something doesn't come crawling out of the woodwork vowing to defend the Crane family's freaking honor." Rick came to a sudden halt and backed up 2 steps and stared at a poster in a shop window. He bent closer, trying to see past the glare. It was a missing persons poster. It showed a picture of a girl in a cheerleader outfit. She had long blonde hair and wore a sweet smile. She was missing from Garden City, Kansas, but her most recent sighting had been a few months ago in Los Angeles. Her name was Elizabeth Carter. However, Ricky knew her as Beth. He quickly looked down the street to find a poster that wasn't locked up inside a store, and plucking one from a light post, he studied it closely. It was definitely Beth. Ricky folded the paper and tucked it in his pocket. "You know that girl?" Steve asked. "It's Beth, the one I've been telling you about. The poster says she's ill and may need medication." "Well, sounds like there's a story there." "It does. You want to do some digging?" "Maybe." They walked along, Steve making a silly comment every once in a while, but Ricky was in no mood to be jovial. Finally, Steve gave up. "You want to talk about it?" Steve asked. Ricky gazed at his friend and shrugged. "Ever thought about getting married?" Steve stumbled. No." "Why not?" "I watched my parents do nothing but rip at each other my entire life. No thanks." "Okay. Well, you ever been in love?" "Darn, Rick, I don't know. Maybe. But my inability to commit makes it difficult to have a lasting relationship with anyone." Ricky chuckled. "I guess that would." "Are you thinking about asking Bree?" "Thinking about it. I don't have the same hang-ups as you. My father was madly in love with my mother, and he's madly in love with Bree's mother." "Your father is one of a kind." "Yeah, he is. I was 11 when my mother died. My father was 30, my age. I'm saying that at my age, he already had an 11-year-old son, and I can't even decide what to do with my life." "Well, I'd say you're doing pretty well so far. You've been in show business since you were a kid. You crossed the line into adulthood and continued to make movies. That's an accomplishment." "And that means nothing to me. I'm a martial artist. The movie star thing was just me trying to share my art with the world." "Well, every artist needs an outlet." "Yeah, maybe I need to get back to the tournament circuit and prove myself again." "Good grief, Ricky, you have nothing to prove. The world reveres you. You have everyone's respect." "Well, maybe I need to prove it to myself." "And maybe you need to prove something to Bree." Silence as the words sunk in. He eyed his friend. "You're not so shallow after all." "Yeah, even a blind hog gets an ear of corn every once in a while." New scene. "Where have you been?" Bree asked the minute Ricky got back. "I had some business to take care of." "Well, that's just nice for you, isn't it?" Wary of the bite in her words, he answered carefully, "Would you have come with me if I had asked you?" It depends on where you went. To the strip. She frowned. No, I'm not ready for that. And that's what I thought. Let me know when you're ready to be seen in public with me, and I'll take you anywhere you want. He hadn't meant for the words to sound bitter, but he realized they did once he'd said them. Softening, he smiled. So, what? Did you miss me? There's a problem with your father. He started up the stairs. What's going on? He's meditating. Ricky stopped, sighed. That's not a problem. Well, Mama's upset about it. She hasn't disturbed him yet, but she says she needs to speak to you. You could have called me on my cell. We did. He pulled his cell out of his pocket. 5 missed calls. Sorry, I had it off for a little bit. I didn't even glance at it when I turned it back on. Ricky went to the bedroom door and knocked softly. Shelley opened it. Ricky, I'm worried about Eric. What's wrong? Well, he started meditating early this morning. He's still at it. He's out there on the balcony. He's changed position only twice that I can tell. I tried to speak to him, but he won't answer me. Leave him alone. What? He's cleansing. Leave him alone. Cleansing? What is that? I've been married to him for 8 years and he's never meditated like this. And if that's what he's doing, couldn't he have told me that that's what he intended to do before he started so I wouldn't worry? He held out his hand. Come downstairs and I'll talk to you about it. Ricky led Shelley and Bree into the study. In Kensho, there is a special mantra for cleansing and purifying our minds. The other day, Dr. Chin said that Dad is like a Zen master. Well, that's not really true. First, he's not a Buddhist, as you know, and he is very much a disciple of the Lord Jesus Christ. But Dad does practice a meditation known as Kensho, except you might call it a Christian version of Kensho. You know, Shelley, from when you first learned about Zendoru, that Dad believes in taking the good and useful and worthy from any source and putting it to use in our lives. Shelley nodded. Well, Kensho literally means seeing into one's own nature. Dad is after Satori. Kensho and Satori means almost the same thing, and so sometimes are used in the same way. But the term Satori is a little different. It is a deeper experience. You make it sound like your dad is tripping, Bree said. Ricky nodded. Well, in a way, he is. He's seeking to commune with God, and some people think that's completely crazy, but that's because they don't think it's really possible to simply sit down, get your mind still, and communicate with God himself. Dad has been blessed. He knows it's possible because of what happened in the cave, and there has to be a mental upheaval that destroys the old accumulations of intellection. That sounds dangerous, Shelley said. I mean, hasn't his mind been through enough? Ricky shrugged. I trust God, don't you? Well, yes, of course, but why didn't he just tell me beforehand what he was going to do? Well, I'm sure it's because he didn't know. He probably sat down to pray and meditate, hoping to clear out any residue of the subliminals, and made it to such a deep level that he didn't want to stop any progress he was making. Is it healthy to sit for such a long time? God will not let anything happen to him. Dad's main purpose is clearing his mind enough to commune with God. You wouldn't interrupt someone who is praying for hours, would you? In essence, he's quieting his mind, getting rid of everything so he can truly hear God. It will end when it ends, and he won't be harmed. Thank goodness, Shelley said, heaving a sigh. Ricky's brow furrowed. Shelley, I mentioned the cave a few minutes ago without thinking. Has Dad ever told you about his experience in the cave back when he was a kid? Yes, he did. Okay, good. So we have to always remember that God is at work in our lives. And I'm really saying that to myself rather than pointing that out to you. During the time when Dad was acting so strange, I wasn't showing my faith very much. I should have, and I'll try to do better. Unfortunately, I'm not near the man Dad is. His footsteps are hard to fill. You're doing just fine, Ricky. You were a rock when we needed you, and you too, Bree. You both stepped up, and your help was priceless. She looked at Bree. I'm sorry about thinking there was something wrong with Eric. I got so worried and upset, and then I worried you. It's okay, Mom. It's understandable. After everything that's happened, I'm always here for you. Shelley took her hand. I know you are, sweetie. You've been such a great help to me, my sweet daughter. Thank you. She kissed her cheek. I guess I'll go up to bed. As soon as they bid Shelley good night, Ricky took Bree's hand and walked her to her room. We have things to talk about. Personal things or things about what's going on with Tommy Crane? Both. Bree sighed. Oh, Ricky. Please not tonight. I'm so very tired of talking and worrying and planning and wondering. I don't want to talk. I want you to come into my room and make love to me. And just let me, how do you say it? Be one with the universe? Ricky smiled. Well, I would love that, Bree, but out of respect for you and for what I just said about trying to follow in my father's footsteps, I think I should go to my own room and do some praying of my own. Bree, surprised by his answer, sighed deeply. Sometimes I truly don't understand you. Well, sometimes I don't understand myself. She turned without another word and went to her room. New scene. Ricky woke the next morning feeling clear on what he wanted to say to Bree. He went straight to her room, but she wasn't there. A quick scan showed she was out on the balcony staring at the ocean as the morning light sparkled on its surface. He smiled contentedly. Their entire family had a propensity to do that, to stand out on the deck or on their private balconies and stare out at the sea. The ocean drew them, and they drew strength from it. She wore nothing but her nightshirt, and she was pacing back and forth, dragging her fingers lightly over the railing as she went. He wondered what she was thinking about that had her brow creased. He was in love with her, completely, emphatically. Yes, he'd come home and taken her to his bed in an effort to make the statement clear that he was not her brother. Still, he wanted more than just sex. He wanted her to be his wife. He wanted to have children with her. He wanted a family of his own, a home of his own. He walked through her room and joined her on the balcony. Good morning, he said softly. She smiled. His heart raced. That famous smile affected him the same way it affected the entire world. Hey, she said. What you thinking about? He asked. Nothing in particular. He put his arms around her. I have an idea. How about we get all dressed up tonight and I'll take you to a nice restaurant and we'll have a glorious dinner and then maybe a tour of the new art exhibit. When she frowned, he quickly added, or maybe a show. I think there was a new play opening this week. She sighed. I don't know, Ricky. I'm not sure I'm not sure that I want to hear all the gossip if we go out together. I mean, just going to that restaurant to meet Jillian the other day was hard enough. He let go of her and stepped back. Well, we can't be prisoners in our own home, can we? Maybe not, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to face it. Ricky's eyes narrowed. There was something about her tone that put him on edge. He spoke slowly. You mean now or ever? She crossed her arms over her breast. I'm not sure what I mean. His heart dropped. He turned and ran a hand through his hair. Bree, do you feel anything for me? Yes. He turned back. What? She was silent. Okay. Okay, maybe if I take the first step, it won't be so hard for you. Let me tell you how I feel. I'm in love with you, Bree. I have been for a long time. And during the 8 years we've been apart, I doubted myself. I thought maybe I just didn't know what love is, you know? But I believe I do now, and I love you. I love your strength, your sweetness, your bitchiness, everything about you. I can't think of anyone else I would want to spend my life with, to wake up to every morning, to give me children. He stopped when she groaned. Okay, maybe I'm moving too fast, but Bree, you must feel something for me. I do. I'm just not sure what to call it. His eyes closed briefly to hide the pain. Let's see, he said slowly. Maybe it would help to break it down, like name one thing, just one thing you like. She shrugged. Well, you're really good in bed. Obviously disappointed, he hung his head. Breaking God's laws had consequences. He looked up. I was hoping for something deeper. Well, I admire and respect you. Great. Just great. Usually those words would be a compliment, but they were something someone would say to a stranger. And as a matter of fact, many strangers had spoken those same words to him. He turned and walked away. He didn't want her to see how her words hurt him. She sighed. I don't know, Ricky. I think you're a really nice guy. His temper flared and he whirled. The statement had been made as if that was a bad thing. That's it, isn't it? I'm nice. You always had an aversion to nice guys. Men for you have to be mean and dangerous, don't they, Bree? They have to give you that edge. I would have thought you'd learned your lesson when Mr. Nick James worked you over, but I guess that's the way you like it. She slapped him. The resounding whack seemed to expand and travel out to sea. His mouth pressed into a straight line, and he drew several breaths before he spoke. I suppose I deserve that, he said softly. I'm going for a run. He climbed the railing and jumped to his side, then turned toward her once more. And I'm going to try very hard from now on to not be nice. Bree stood frozen. She couldn't believe she'd slapped him. He'd made her so mad. She drew a breath. She realized she was so mad because he hit the sore spot. Why didn't she tell him how she really feels about him? Why is she so afraid of telling him that she cares for him, maybe even loves him, and that she's also thought about having his children? Why? Why does he scare her so much? A few minutes later, she saw him headed for the beach in nothing but a pair of shorts and running shoes. She sighed. When he gets back, she'll apologize and maybe try to be more honest with him about how she feels. New scene. Shelley took a tray of breakfast up to Eric. He'd finally finished meditating and climbed into bed around 5 in the morning. He'd wrapped her in his arms and gone to sleep. He deserved a little pampering. When she opened the door, it was obvious he was in distress. He tossed and turned and then, gasping, sat straight up. Eric, what's wrong? Are you okay? He continued to breathe, drawing the oxygen into his lungs as if he'd been drowning. Finally, he closed his eyes and leaned back against the headboard. I've had a precognitive dream. Shelley frowned. He'd had them before, and they were always a precursor of something bad. How much more can the family take? Tell me, Shelley urged softly, sitting down next to him and resting a reassuring hand on his chest. Let me sort it out a minute. He was quiet, his eyes shifting back and forth as he thought about what he'd just been shown. Someone, one of us, is hurt, or ill, maybe. They're in a great deal of pain. Is it Mark? I'm not sure who. It seems like one person, and then it seems like all of us. Because if one of us is in pain, the others are too. Eric nodded. That has to be it. So one of us is going to suffer, and I mean suffer greatly. There's a burning feeling in my heart as if someone died. But we can avoid that, right? Didn't you tell me once before that you were able to use your dreams to change the outcome? Yes, and at times I've been able to do that. Hopefully, I'll be able to do it again. He closed his eyes and shook his head. There is so much anguish. I almost can't see around it, but still, there seems to be more. Someone else, maybe. I can't see. There's too much pain. It's as if I can feel it myself. It's consuming. It's everywhere. Like an illness? He shook his head. I don't know. I can't tell. Well, I hope it's not Mark. I mean, the AIDS thing, or with football. I'm always worried when he's out on the football field. Well, I hope it's not anyone. Maybe we'll be able to avoid it. He knew, however, that something bad was wrong. Something bad was coming. He just hoped he'll be able to do the right thing at the right time to avoid disaster. Smiling up at his wife, he patted the side of the bed. Thanks for the breakfast, sweetie. Sit with me. Sighing, she sat down, her face drawn in worry. Jason called. He said he needed to come over and fill us in on what happened last night. He said he wanted to set up stronger security. Eric nodded as he thought about the dream he just had. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. New scene. Just admit it, Ricky thought as he ran. It's not going to happen. She doesn't love me. Oh, I'm good enough for some steamy sex, all right, but as far as a real relationship, I don't do it for her. Well, I did it. I put myself out there. My father advised me to put it out there. He'd also said it was up to her with what she did with it. Well, now we know. He shook his head. I blew it. I went and jumped the gun. I meant to take time and give her time. Maybe I can still do that. Maybe she'll come around. I need to back off, but not too far off. I won't become her brother, not ever again. His cell buzzed in his pocket and he pulled it out, talking as he ran. Yeah, he said. I had a friend in New York do some digging on Nicholas James, Steve said. Did you find anything? Yeah, he's dead. He died 3 years ago in a drug bust gone bad. Apparently, someone hacked their system, changed the details of his leaving the force. What are you doing? You're breathing hard. Did I interrupt you and Bree? No, and I'm not breathing hard. I'm barely breaking a sweat. I'm just kidding, Rick. What's got your panties in a wad? I don't want to talk right now. I'm running. I'll call you when I get back. He stuffed the phone back in his pocket. So, Bree's bodyguard is not who he says he is. She'll be tickled to know that. It should make her real happy that she's been having an affair with an imposter. She likes things like. He should have been more aware of his surroundings. He'd had his mind on other things. If he hadn't been thinking so hard about Bree and feeling sorry for himself, he would have seen the two men long before they jumped out in front of him. It wasn't them that had him worried, though. It was the red-headed guy up in the rocks with a rifle trained on him that had him concerned. A glance back over his shoulder told him he was no longer inside of the house. Of course, this was the perfect spot for an ambush. The sharp bend, the rocks, little visibility. The nearest home would be the neighbors at least 300 or 400 yards beyond where he stood and also out of sight. His father said to stay alert. So far, Tommy hadn't planned anything lethal. Looks like things have changed. Caught you off guard, didn't we, Keno? One of the men said. And they say you're almost invincible. Ricky smiled. Yeah, good job. You did catch me off guard, but that won't help you. They also say you're a hot shot. You mean I'm confident, he said as he backed up, hoping to draw his assailants into the line of fire between himself and the guy with the scope rifle. You trying to run, Keno? Ricky rolled his eyes. Yeah, actually, he was. Once he took out these two, he needed to make it to a place in the rocks where the rifleman would have to hunt for him. That would be his only chance. He backed again, trying to get closer to the edge of the jutting cliffs. His hand slipped into his pocket. He just needed to punch a few buttons. He could toss the phone aside. His father would come. Unfortunately, the moment the men spotted the phone, they charged at him. Ricky spun and delivered a kick to the face of the first one to reach him. Blood spurted from an obvious broken nose. The large man sank to his knees for a split second before he fell over moaning and holding his face. The second man moved in, and Ricky grabbed him and held him close, dragging him along with him. But unfortunately, the phone fell from his grasp. He hoped he'd be able to get back to it momentarily. Apparently, the rifleman realized why Ricky was dragging the man along, and he fired. The man Ricky held stiffened and then went limp. Ricky was able to drag him a few more steps before he had to let him fall. Ricky ran several steps and dove as the rifleman fired again. He rolled and came up, headed toward the rocks. Another shot. Pain exploded in his ankle and moved upward. He looked down to see a dart hanging from just behind his left ankle. Darts, he thought, not bullets. So I guess I'll live a little longer anyway. Quickly pulling it out, he took off running again, was almost to the rocks when he was hit again in the thigh this time, and he went down. The rifleman came to stand over him. Ricky looked up at him, memorizing his face, noting his red hair. They wanted to take him alive, and that didn't bode well. Ricky's breath slowed, his vision blurred. One thing he knew for sure. He was in big trouble. New scene. Tommy stood over the great Ricky Keno. He was out cold right now, but he would wake soon enough, and when he did, they were in for a real treat. Give you a hard time, did he? Red nodded toward his cohorts. He gave them a hard time. I had no problem shooting him. Too bad I had to shoot Hector, too. He got in the way. If Duke hadn't regained consciousness, I would have had to leave both him and Hector behind. It's been 6 hours, or both be awake soon. Get Keno in the chair. He motioned to an old, large wooden desk chair that he'd ripped the padded seat from, leaving a big hole. I want his arms taped to the arms, his legs to the chair legs, and make sure he's secure. And I don't care if you have to use an entire roll of duct tape on each leg. There's no seat. He's going to fall through as soon as we put him in it. We'll put a small board across the back to give him a little ledge to sit on. They shrugged. It's your game. Yes, it is. New scene. Eric, Bree said, coming quietly into the study. He looked up and smiled. What you need, hon? She wrung her hands. I'm worried about Ricky. Eric was instantly alert. Why? We had a fight, and he went for a run, and it's been hours now, and he hasn't come back. I walked down the beach, but I didn't see him. I thought at first he was just mad and staying gone to make me worry, but then I realized Ricky wouldn't do that, no matter how mad he is at me. Eric stood. No, he wouldn't. Stay here. Make sure Jeffy's okay and don't let her or Shelley out of your sight. Okay. Bree, Shelley, and Jeffy waited by the dining room doors for Eric to come back, and when he finally came running back to the house, his face was pale and he was on his cell phone. He looked up as he came through the doors. They've taken Ricky. Jeffy burst into tears. Shelley picked her up and held her close. Bree was silent, her face a stone mask. They who? Has to be Tommy. How do you know? Bree asked. Eric tossed Ricky's cell phone and a small green dart onto the table. What's that? Bree asked. It's a dart from a tranquilizer gun. What are we going to do? Shelley cried. I've called the police and they're on the way. He stopped and drew a calming breath. I have to call Jason and Justin. He turned away. He was having a difficult time holding it together. They had his son, and if they'd taken him with a dart, that meant that they had plans for him, and he was completely at their mercy. He would eventually wake up. The question is, what kind of situation would he wake up to? Bree remained stoic. When the police arrived, she remained stoic. When Mark and Joey got home and were ready to tear the city down to find Ricky, she remained stoic. And when Jason and Justin got there and went into a private meeting with Eric, she remained stoic. And even when the police finally got around to questioning her and she had to tell what the argument had been about in front of everyone, she remained stoic. The house was swarming with activity. The FBI had been called in. The dart was sent away to make sure it was Ricky's blood on the tip. The beach was scoured. They found the side of a bra. They found several sets of footprints. They found more blood samples and sent them to a lab. There was no way someone could have carried a man off that beach without being noticed, so they assumed he was taken by boat. Agents and officers were sent to nearby harbors, to neighbors. When night came, someone brought food for the family, but no one ate. Phone taps were being established. Each member of the family was being interviewed separately. Everyone was surprised when Jason let everyone know that the real Tommy Crane was not the one they'd been watching. The information only confirmed what they knew. Tommy had Ricky. The media arrived. Fortunately, they couldn't get past the security gate. Shelley lay down with Jeffy until she fell asleep and then went to join her husband. She found him on the deck staring out at the ocean, and she wrapped her arms around him. We'll find him. I know we will. He nodded. I believe we will. Alive or dead is my concern. In my dream, there was so much pain, and it seemed someone died. Positive thoughts, Eric. Isn't that what you always tell me? He's alive. He'll come back to us. There's something else, too, that's bothering me. The dream itself. It came so late. I mean, I was having the dream about the same time Ricky was trying to fight them off. That's not how it usually happens. I can hardly call that precognitive. Well, maybe it's because of everything that's been going on. I mean, you haven't really been yourself. He nodded. I guess I wasn't in the right vibration to receive any messages until this morning. He shook his head. Shelley squeezed his hand. He's alive. I know he is. And what's more, Jeffy knows it. Eric looked down into his wife's eyes. They didn't often talk about Jeffy's psychic abilities, but the child had uncanny insights and had predicted events before their happening many times. Eric nodded. Well, then he's alive. And he's suffering, he thought. In the dream, there was so much pain. New scene. He came to slowly. He couldn't feel his arms or legs, and he really hoped they were still there. Opening his eyes just a slit, he saw a concrete floor. He kept his eyes lowered to buy himself some time to get oriented. He was nauseated, he had a headache, and was completely immobile. He allowed slight eye movement to make sure his arms and legs were still attached. He was in a chair that was missing most of the seat. His legs and arms were taped securely to the chair's arms and legs. From elbow to wrist and knee to ankle, there was no way he could move them. Keeping his head down, he made a quick scan of the room, which showed him the lower half of an old desk with an old metal wastebasket next to it on his right. Beyond that, a few cardboard boxes, and finally 2 doors, both closed. On his left, steps leading upward. The floor was concrete. His senses were returning, and he knew there were others in the room with him, watching him. He could hear them breathing. He raised his head enough to see shoes, 4 pair. 2 pair were those of the men who jumped him on the beach. It was the ones closest he was interested in. He drew a slow, deep breath. Ricky knew he was in big trouble. This may very well be the day he dies, he thought, and even though he wasn't 100% sure about that fact, he was about another. He was about to feel pain. A lot of pain. That would be the only reason to have him so completely secured. He drew another deep breath. He didn't do pain well, and he had a feeling this was going to be bad. Well, he thought, time to face the music. Slowly, he lifted his head and peered around the room, taking note of the faces that had been on the beach. Finally, he shifted his eyes to meet his nemesis. He showed no surprise that the man standing in front of him was the one he'd known as Nicholas James. His hair was a little longer, showing the beginnings of blonde roots, and his eyes were now blue, but it was the same guy. The large man gestured toward Ricky's bindings and the room, and then nodded back at Ricky. You got the situation? Ricky's jaw clenched, and he nodded back slowly. Got it. Ricky watched him pull on black leather gloves. Do you know who I am? Ricky sighed heavily. I know who you're not. You're not Nicholas James. He's a dead New York cop. You are someone who has a vendetta against my family, and the only people I can think of who have a vendetta against my family would be the Crane brothers. So I'm going to surmise that you must be Tommy Crane, since 8 years ago I had the distinct pleasure of watching James Crane die. The blows came fast, once, twice, 3 times across the face, Ricky grunting with each hit. Tommy stepped back, his face a mottled red, his breathing labored. Hold up, Ricky said, a little breathless himself. I made one comment. You hit me 3 times. What's up with that? Are you going to do this? At least do it right. Tommy's mouth fell open. The 3 other men in the room looked decidedly nervous. Then Tommy chuckled. Then he outright laughed. I always heard you were a funny guy, Keno. Yeah, that's why they pay me the big bucks, Ricky countered. So this is going to be much more fun than I originally presumed. Ricky didn't respond because it wasn't going to be fun for him. Tommy walked back and forth in front of Ricky. I brought you here for a reason, Keno. So this is not just to be vindictive? Oh, it's that too. Ricky twisted his arm, hoping to loosen the tape, but he couldn't budge. Tommy didn't miss the effort. You want out? Ricky looked up. Very much. Is that an option? I don't think so. Come on. How about just one hand? Just one. You think one hand would make a difference? I do. And you do too, or you do what I ask and let one hand loose. Come on. Just one, or are you scared? Another blow. This one caught his lip just right, and Ricky's tongue darted out to taste the blood. He spit the remainder toward the floor. Get to the point, Tommy. What is it you want? Tommy moved forward, swinging, and by the time he finished, Ricky was almost out. Tommy grabbed Ricky by the hair and held his head up. I'm in charge this time, Keno. Me, not you. I ask the questions. No problem. Sorry, man, Ricky said, slurring his words. Tommy let go of Ricky's hair and his head fell forward. Get some water, Tommy barked to one of the men in the room. A few minutes later, Ricky felt cool water washing over his hair and skin. Revised somewhat, he lifted his head, and Tommy offered him a drink of bottled water. He accepted it and drank greedily. I apologize, Keno. I lost control. Ricky shrugged. It happens. But it doesn't ever happen to you, does it, the great Ricky Keno? Sure. It happens to me all the time. As a matter of fact, I see it happening to me in the very near future. Tommy chuckled. Another funny one. He stepped back and picked up a knife that had been lying on the desk next to Ricky. And Ricky heaved a sigh. And we're moving a step up, he thought. Yet I still don't even know what it is Tommy's after. He watched as Tommy pulled a lighter from his pocket and held the flame to the knife blade. He swallowed hard. Tommy watched the blade closely, then held it up to inspect as if contemplating its temperature. Apparently satisfied, he pressed it against Ricky's chest. Ricky's eyes closed and he grunted, his breathing labored. Ricky cursed under his breath. There was instantaneous relief the moment Tommy pulled the knife away, and Ricky drew several deep breaths to calm his rapidly beating heart. Tommy, extremely pleased with himself, paced in front of Ricky like a tiger preening. You know, Keno, you and me, we're almost like brothers. How you figure that? Ricky asked, reaching for composure. I mean, we've shared the same woman, and what a piece she is, huh? Ricky's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. Those long legs, those little sounds she makes. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? You'd better kill me. Why you say that, Keno? 'Cause if you don't, I will come back and kill you. A threat? Promise. Now, Keno, you're really in no position to be making threats or promises. He picked up the knife and flicked the lighter. Well, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, I brought you here for a reason, and that is, I want some information. I'd like you to tell me, Keno, who it was that threw the knife that killed my brother. Finally, the big question, Ricky thought. He smiled up at Tommy. It doesn't matter who it was. Your brother getting dead is the only important aspect of that day. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. Ricky groaned and cursed and made more threats. Remember when we got your dad that day all those years ago? He nodded toward the red-headed man. Roy was there. What a great time that was. Did you know that I was the one who held the belt? I was the one that got to beat him into oblivion. He never said a thing. He never made a sound. I have to say, Keno, you are not even close to being the man your father is. Ricky nodded his head. You are not telling me anything I don't know. Ah, there it is. The famous Keno family loyalty. He moved forward and punched Ricky square in the mouth. What was that for? I didn't say anything, Ricky said. I guess just for being a Keno. Now, let's try again. Who threw the knife? Why do you want to know? Ricky asked. This time the punch was to the eye, and Ricky winced. He felt himself start to nod out, but good old Tommy was there with the refreshing water. Ricky now realizes this truly was going to get bad because he really didn't think he wanted to tell Tommy who threw the knife. And that is the end of chapter 10.